They told me not to come home for Christmas because this is family only. So on the morning they boarded the plane, I canceled the credit card they were traveling on and let the return flight be denied for non-payment. I, 32M, found out I wasn't really family 3 weeks before Christmas, and I made sure they understood what that meant by the time they were stranded at the airport. My father remarried when I was 7. My mother had died in a car accident the year before, and he met this woman at some grief counseling group. She had 2 kids from her previous marriage, both younger than me. Within 6 months they were married, and suddenly I had a stepmother and 2 step-siblings living in our house. My father always insisted we were a real family, that there was no difference between blood and the bonds we chose. I believed him. I spent 25 years believing him. The first crack appeared in October. I was visiting for my father's birthday when I overheard my stepmother talking to her daughter in the kitchen. They didn't know I had come back inside after taking out the trash. My stepmother was complaining about how much the Christmas trip was going to cost, how they'd have to be careful with spending. Her daughter laughed and said something about how at least they wouldn't have to worry about an extra plane ticket this year. My stepmother agreed, saying it would be nice to have a real family Christmas for once, just the 4 of them. I stood there in the hallway, bags of garbage still in my hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. They were planning a trip without me, a family trip that explicitly excluded me. I walked back outside, threw away the trash, and came back in making plenty of noise. Neither of them mentioned anything about Christmas or any trip. Over the next few weeks, I waited for someone to bring it up. My father called me twice, my stepbrother texted about a football game, my stepsister sent me some meme she thought was funny. Nobody said a word about Christmas plans. I didn't bring it up either. I wanted to see how long they'd wait, how they'd finally tell me I wasn't invited to my own family's holiday celebration. The call came on December 4th. My stepmother phoned me, her voice bright and cheerful, asking about my work in my apartment. We made small talk for a few minutes before she finally got to the point. She told me they'd decided to do something different this year, that they were taking a trip to a resort in Mexico over Christmas. She said it was going to be a small thing, just immediate family, and that she hoped I understood. She actually used those words. Immediate family. I asked her directly what that meant. She stumbled over her explanation, saying something about how the resort package was only for 4 people and how expensive it would be to add another person. I pointed out that I could pay for my own ticket and room. She got quiet for a moment, then said that honestly, they'd been planning this as a family bonding experience, and having me there would change the dynamic. She suggested I could visit them for New Year's instead, that we'd have our own celebration then. I told her I understood perfectly. She seemed relieved, thanked me for being so mature about it, and ended the call. I sat in my apartment for an hour, staring at nothing, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. See, what my stepmother didn't know was that 3 years ago, my father had asked me to add him as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. He'd had some credit issues and needed to rebuild his score. I had excellent credit and a card with a high limit that I barely used. Adding him helped his credit rating, and he'd promised to only use it for emergencies. Over time, emergencies became occasional purchases, and occasional purchases became regular use. I didn't mind. He was my father. Family helped each other. What really happened was that my stepmother had gotten hold of that card and started using it too. I'd noticed the charges, but my father had asked me not to make a fuss about it, promising they'd pay me back. They never did. The balance had grown to nearly $8,000 over the past year. I'd been planning to talk to him about it after the holidays, maybe set up a payment plan. I was trying to be understanding. Family was supposed to be understanding. I logged into my credit card account and looked at the recent charges. There it was. 4 round-trip tickets to Cancun, departing December 22nd, returning December 27th. The resort booking, travel insurance, new luggage from an expensive brand, clothes, sunscreen, all on my card. They'd spent almost $3,000 on this family trip that I wasn't family enough to attend. I didn't do anything immediately. I wanted to be sure, wanted to give them one more chance to do the right thing. I called my father 2 days later and mentioned that I hadn't made any Christmas plans yet, hinting that I was flexible if anything came up. He told me he was sorry, but they'd already committed to this Mexico trip, that it was just going to be the 4 of them. He said it casually, like it was perfectly normal to exclude your son from Christmas. I asked if he was sure there was no way I could join them. He said maybe next year they'd plan something bigger. That was when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. This was a choice. They had chosen to exclude me and to use my money to do it. I spent the next week making preparations. I documented every charge they'd made on my card over the past year, organized by date and amount. I called the credit card company and explained that I needed to remove an authorized user due to unauthorized charges. They told me I could do that at any time and walked me through the process. I didn't remove him yet. I was waiting for the right moment. December 22nd arrived. I knew their flight was at 10 in the morning. I woke up at 6, made myself coffee, and sat down at my computer. At 7, I logged into my credit card account and removed my father as an authorized user. The representative I spoke with confirmed that any cards issued under his name would be deactivated immediately. I thanked her and hung up. Then I waited. The first call came at 9:30. My father, his voice tight with panic, asking if there was something wrong with the credit card. He said they were at the airport trying to check their bags, and the card wasn't working. I asked him which card he was talking about. He said my card, the one I'd let him use. I told him I'd removed him as an authorized user that morning. The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. He asked me why I would do that, his panic shifting to anger. I told him I decided I didn't want to subsidize a family vacation that I wasn't family enough to attend. He started to say something, but I talked over him. I reminded him that they'd spent nearly $3,000 on this trip using my credit, after already owing me $8,000 from previous charges they'd never paid back. I asked him how he thought that made me feel. He tried to backtrack, saying there had been a misunderstanding, that of course I was family, that the trip was just a special thing his wife had planned. I asked him if he really thought I was that stupid. He went quiet again. In the background I could hear my stepmother asking what was happening, her voice shrill with stress. My father said they were going to miss their flight if they couldn't check in right away. He asked me to call the credit card company and fix this, that we could talk about everything when they got back. I told him no. He raised his voice, demanding that I fix this immediately, saying I was being childish and vindictive. I stayed calm. I told him that if I wasn't family enough for Christmas, I wasn't family enough to pay for their vacation. Then I ended the call. He called back 4 times in the next 10 minutes. I didn't answer. My stepmother called. I didn't answer. My stepsister sent me a series of increasingly angry texts, calling me selfish and cruel. I blocked her number. My stepbrother called and actually tried to be reasonable, saying they should have included me and asking if there was any way to work this out. I told him the time to work it out was before they booked a family vacation without me. He didn't call again. My father sent me a long text message explaining that they'd had to pay for the tickets and baggage fees with his debit card, which had nearly drained his checking account. He said they were going on the trip because the tickets were non-refundable, but that we needed to have a serious conversation when they got back. I didn't respond. For the next 5 days, I had the most peaceful Christmas of my adult life. I worked a few extra shifts at my job, went to a movie on Christmas Eve, and spent Christmas Day reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for months. Nobody called me. Nobody texted me. I didn't send any holiday greetings to anyone in my family. It felt strange at first, then liberating. On December 27th, my phone started ringing again. It was my stepmother, calling from the airport in Cancun. She was crying, telling me that their return flight had been canceled because the card they'd used for the original booking was no longer valid. The airline wouldn't let them board without paying again or providing a different payment method. She begged me to help them, saying they were stranded in Mexico with barely any money left. I asked her if she'd considered calling her immediate family for help. She started sobbing harder, saying I was being cruel, that they had nowhere else to turn. I told her that maybe this was a good opportunity for family bonding. Then I hung up. My father called next, and he wasn't crying. He was furious. He told me I was going to regret this, that what I was doing was illegal, that he'd raised me better than this. I laughed at that. I actually laughed. I told him he hadn't raised me at all after my mother died, that he'd handed that job over to a woman who'd spent 25 years making it clear I was an outsider in my own family. I told him he'd made his choice about who his family was, and now he could live with it. He threatened to sue me. I told him to go ahead, that I had documentation of every unauthorized charge they'd made, and that I'd be happy to let a court sort out who owed whom. He hung up on me. They managed to scrape together enough money to book a return flight 2 days later, flying standby on the cheapest tickets available. My father called me when they landed, asking if we could meet to talk things through. I told him I'd think about it. He asked when. I said maybe next year. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since they got back from Mexico, and the fallout has been exactly what I expected and somehow worse than I imagined. My stepmother started a whisper campaign among their friends and our extended family almost immediately. According to my aunt, who actually bothered to call and hear my side of things, the story being circulated is that I had a mental breakdown and sabotaged their vacation out of jealousy. My stepmother conveniently left out the part where they explicitly told me I wasn't family enough to attend their family Christmas vacation, or the part where they'd racked up $11,000 in charges on my credit card over the past year. My aunt was the only one who seemed to understand. She told me that my stepmother had been making comments for years about how difficult it was to blend families, about how I'd never really accepted them. My aunt had always thought it was normal stepfamily tension. Now she was seeing it differently. She apologized for not noticing sooner and told me she'd be happy to set the record straight with anyone who asked. My father sent me an email on January 8th. It was long, rambling, and full of contradictions. He said he loved me, but that I'd crossed a line. He said he understood I was hurt, but that my actions were disproportionate. He said family was supposed to forgive each other, which was rich coming from someone who'd chosen his wife's comfort over his son's inclusion. The email ended with an ultimatum. I needed to apologize to my stepmother and agree to family counseling, or he would have no choice but to cut contact with me. I read that email 3 times, looking for any acknowledgement of what they'd done wrong. There wasn't any. The entire message was about my overreaction, my cruelty, my failure to be the bigger person. Nothing about excluding me from Christmas. Nothing about the money they'd stolen. Nothing about 25 years of being treated like a guest in my own family. I wrote back a single sentence. I told him that he'd already made his choice about who his family was, and that I was simply respecting that choice. He hasn't responded. Neither has anyone else from that side of the family, except my aunt. The silence should bother me more than it does. Instead, it feels like clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not trying to prove I belong somewhere I was never really wanted. My stepbrother reached out last week through a mutual friend. He wanted me to know that he'd always considered me family, that his mother could be difficult, and that he hoped we could maintain a relationship separate from the drama. I appreciated the gesture. I told him I needed time to think about what kind of relationships I wanted to maintain with anyone from that family. He said he understood. The credit card situation is being handled through the proper channels now. I filed a dispute for the unauthorized charges and provided documentation showing that my father had exceeded the scope of the authorized user agreement. My credit card company was surprisingly understanding. Apparently, this kind of family financial abuse is more common than I'd realized. They've frozen the disputed amount while they investigate, and they've already confirmed that I won't be held responsible for any of it. My father will likely see his credit score take a significant hit. Part of me feels guilty about that. The other part, the part that's tired of being treated like an obligation rather than a son, feels absolutely nothing. I've started seeing a therapist. She specializes in family trauma and helped me understand that what I experienced wasn't just garden-variety stepfamily tension. It was systematic exclusion, enabled by a parent who chose the path of least resistance instead of standing up for his child. She asked me what I would tell a friend who described a similar situation. I told her I'd tell them they deserved better. She asked why I didn't believe I deserved better. I didn't have a good answer for that. My mother's sister, my actual aunt on my mother's side, called me last week. We hadn't spoken in years, mainly because my father had distanced himself from my mother's family after he remarried. She'd heard through the grapevine about what happened and wanted to check on me. We talked for 2 hours. She told me stories about my mother that I'd never heard, showed me pictures I'd never seen. She said I looked like my mother when I smiled, that I had her stubborn streak and her sense of fairness. She asked if I wanted to come to her place for a late Christmas celebration. Her kids, my cousins who I barely knew, were planning to be there. She said it was time I met my actual family, the people who'd wanted to be part of my life all along, but had respected my father's wishes to keep his distance. I told her I'd think about it. I went. It was awkward at first, meeting all these relatives who were strangers despite sharing my blood. But my aunt had made my mother's famous lasagna, using a recipe she'd kept for 25 years. My cousins were welcoming and funny and didn't ask invasive questions about the Mexico situation. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I sat at a table where I didn't feel like I had to earn my seat. One of my cousins, who's a lawyer, pulled me aside and asked if I wanted legal advice about the credit card situation. I told him it was being handled. He said that wasn't what he meant. He asked if I knew that my mother had left me money in a trust that was supposed to be accessible when I turned 25. I told him I'd never heard anything about a trust. His face went dark. He said he'd look into it. Turns out my mother had a life insurance policy and some savings that she'd put in a trust for me before she died. My father was the trustee. The money was supposed to be used for my education and then turned over to me when I turned 25. I'm 32 now. I'd never seen a penny of it. My cousin is helping me file the paperwork to find out what happened to that money. I have a feeling I already know. My father called me today. He said we needed to talk about some financial matters, that there had been some misunderstandings about my mother's estate. I told him to have his lawyer contact my lawyer. He started to argue. I hung up. I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires energy, requires caring about the relationship enough to fight for it. What I feel now is something cleaner, something simpler. I feel free. Free from the obligation to pretend that blood or marriage created bonds that were never really there. Free from the guilt of not being good enough for people who were never going to see me as good enough. Free from a family that was only family when it was convenient for them. They wanted a family Christmas without me. They got it. And now they get to live with what that means permanently. I hope it was worth it. I hope every Christmas from now on, when they're sitting around their table with their immediate family, they remember the son they decided wasn't immediate enough. I hope it haunts them. But honestly, I'm not sure it will. Some people are capable of extraordinary selfishness without ever experiencing regret. My father and his wife might be those people. I'm okay with that now. Their inability to value me says nothing about my worth and everything about their character. It took me 32 years and one canceled credit card to figure that out, but better late than never. I'm spending next Christmas with my mother's family. My real family. The ones who actually wanted me there. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.